Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another exciting career talk. We are so excited that you are joining us to have this very insightful discussion with a woman who has done many incredible things in her career. We are excited that you are going to listen to her sharing her story and useful career advice. I would like to give a warm welcome to Mrs. Aisha Lawrey. I hope I pronounced that correctly. She is a woman who is armed with a degree in electrical engineering. She has worked as a human. She has worked as a human process consultant and a project manager, and is currently the senior director, programs and scholarships at the National Council for Minorities in Engineering. She spends her time coaching, and she's also a STEM ambassador. Without further ado, we are so excited to have you with us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation and being here with you all just to tell you a little bit about myself, my journey, what I've done, some challenges that I face, achievements, and accomplishments. So at any time you all have questions, you can put it in the chat and then we can answer them at the end. So I'll just start by giving you a little bit about my background and let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Great. So this is me. This is post-COVID. So it's a old and so just to let you know, I love to make sure when I'm talking to students, they actually are able to see what an electrical engineer looks like or what an engineer looks like. Just to let people know that there are women and people who are in these fields and who are doing very well in these fields. So the fact that I'm here, can you hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Glad you can hear me though. I was saying that I'm going to spend some time on this slide here. There are a lot of images that I'm going to go through, which really make up who I am and where I've come from. So I was born and raised in New Jersey, so here in the United States, and I have a little license plate that's in the upper left-hand corner, probably right-hand corner. Well, not sure which way you're seeing. So it says Jersey Girl. So that is where I constantly go back to. That's where my roots are. I am the oldest of 4 girls. And then the lower right-hand side of the picture is a picture of my family. So there are my parents and then all of my sisters. So being the oldest really had a lot of, responsibility. If any of you are out there who are the eldest, you have to set an example for your younger brothers and sisters and the people in your family and your community. And so at a very young age, I was always just thinking about how things worked and why did something do that? And my mother would always say that it was because I was a busybody, always into something and messing with something. And I was just very curious as to how things worked and why they moved. And if you break something, what happens? And so never, ever did I think or had a name to put to it that was called engineering. At that particular time, as a young child, I knew nothing about what engineering was. And so going along in my life, the community and the schools that I attended were predominantly Black and Hispanic. So that was my community. That was the school that I went to. That was my church. So that was everything that I pretty much saw and knew. And so, just being from that particular area and place, I was not exposed to traveling outside of pretty much New Jersey for a while. but definitely never got out of the United States, and our family didn't get a chance to travel. And so funny enough, my mother actually, when she was in college, when she was in high school, she actually really loved history. She didn't have the opportunity or the chance to go to college, but she really loved history. And one of the places that she always wanted to visit and go was Africa. And I'm still working on getting her there as well. So my middle name is Kenya. She loved just learning about Kenya. So my name is Aisha Kenya. And I love that she gave that piece of me, although we don't have family that we know that are from Africa. I know we all originate from there, but that was something that was very dear to me because it was dear to her. And so I really like the fact that she exposed me to history and wanting to actually look at different places that we have never been. And so I was determined, even at a young age, that I would be able to take my parents and have them travel around the world and, you know, see other places outside of the United States. So my childhood was pretty ordinary. Like I said, being the oldest of my 4 sisters, just wanted to be responsible. I was always that kid that got good grades. And at that time, it really didn't come hard to me. So, you know, always getting A's in my subjects. Math was my favorite subject. I just loved numbers and the fact that you could do so much with them and so many different things. And so a funny story, when I was a kid, we had an old television and I took it apart because I wanted to know how was it that everyone was able to watch the same program at the same time. And so I took the back of the television off and took out the wires and pulled everything out. And my mother had a complete fit because I totally messed up the television, but I was just curious as to how things worked. And again, never knowing at that time what it was called, but I was always just that really curious child. And so as I gotten older, once it was time for me to go to high school, I went to a high school again where the majority of the people looked like me. They were either Black or Hispanic, so that still was my life. And so when my counselor asked, you know, what it was that I wanted to do, I still really didn't have a clear idea. I actually thought about going to law school because I was on the debate team and I love to talk. And so, and there were a lot of law shows on TV during that time in the 80s. So I said, okay, I'm gonna be a lawyer, not knowing anything about really much of any other careers. My guidance counselor said, well, you could be a math teacher or you could be a science teacher. And I said, are those the only careers that there are? I love teachers, but I said, I just don't think that I'm that special to be a teacher. Like, teachers are very special people. And so I wanted to find out what other type of careers there were. It was actually one of my teachers that told me about engineering, and she asked me if I knew about it, and I told her I had no idea anything about what engineering was. So when she explained it to me, I began to really do research and go to the library and just find all this amazing information about engineers and what they do and the things they make and how engineering is all around you in your everyday life. And I thought that that was really interesting. And so I went to Stevens Institute of Technology, which, if you can see, there's just a little Stevens Institute of Technology on the screen. It's right under my Find the Cure. So that's where I actually went to college, and I got my Bachelor's of Engineering degree in electrical engineering. Now, I will tell you that going to Stevens was a complete culture shock for me. It was something that was totally opposite than what I had grew up with, because this school was predominantly white, and there were many students from places all over the world, from other countries, and I just wasn't used to that. So I was happy that I was able to interact with these people because I had never done that before. And my mother will always say the best way to really learn about someone is that you have to eat with them, you know, meaning have dinners and different meals, and then sleep with them, you know. So being in the dorm who did not look like you, and you can learn and understand where they come from and about their culture, was something that I was really excited about, but it was also very scary for me, since this wasn't something that I was used to. So it was very challenging being at that university, only because, you know, I felt like everyone here is smart, so they must be smarter than me. When I left high school, I graduated in the top of my class. But when I got to college, I started to kind of question and doubt if I was smart enough, because there were things that other kids received that I didn't get. So the resources were not the same for everyone. And because there were some resources that I didn't have, I felt like maybe, you know, I wasn't good enough, and I began to doubt myself and say, you know, am I really here? And why did they admit me? But it was having to get over those things when I would talk to my mother, and she would say, you're there because you should be there, and you're good enough. And so having those reinforcements from your family, being able to encourage you and support you, is definitely something that, you know, I always tell people is so important, that you may not even realize how important and what an effect that really does have on students. So some of the challenges that I did face when I went to college was just the simple fact of like studying. So I really did not study. And I always hate to say this out loud. When I was in high school, I didn't really study. There were things that just came to me. And so I would kind of review my work and look at my stuff before I took a test, and then I would take it and I would always get good grades. So that was something that I did not have very good study skills in college, in high school. So I had to learn how to study when I went to college, which was very different. I also had to do time management. So it was like my parents would pretty much wake me up and I would go to school all day, but being in college, you're on a schedule. You have to wake yourself up. You have to make sure that you get to class. And so that was something that I had to learn as well. That was very different. So that was a challenge for me. And then another challenge that I had was just asking for help. That was a huge challenge because things came to me and I really didn't need to ask for too much help. I felt like if I asked for help, then that meant that I was weak and that I really didn't know what I was doing. So it was a real struggle my first semester in college just to be able to ask for help. But once I got to learn that, it was definitely much easier. And I will say just the freedom part of being in college too. Being the oldest of my four sisters, like I said, neither one of my parents went to college. My mother was a telephone operator, and she did that for 40 years. And my father was a police officer, and he did that for like 30 years. So they were very, very strict about, you know, where we could go, what we could do. Everywhere that I needed to go, my parents would take me, drop me off, and pick me up. So now I'm in college and I have like all of this freedom. So of course, like I have no idea what to do with this freedom because I was so used to always being told what to do, when to do it. So that was very different for me. And the college that I went to was actually, it was very close to New York City. So because it was close to New York City, as in high school, I never really got to go to New York City except we may go to a play or a show or something like that. So I found out that New York City was open every day. And I thought it was just something that people went to on the weekends where they would go to parties and do different things like that. So I was in New York City almost every day, almost every night, just having a good time because I had all of this freedom. But that freedom and going there and doing those things really affected and hurt my academics. And so I was on a full scholarship as well. And so if you know, if you're on a full scholarship, if you don't have your academics, then you lose that and then you will have to leave school. And it was really important for me to just be able to maintain that scholarship because my parents really couldn't afford to send me to that school. And so the end of my first semester, my GPA really low. I had like a 1.9 GPA. Yes, even when I say it out loud to this day, I cringe because I couldn't believe it. I knew that I was having a good time, but I didn't know I was having that much of a good time. And basically, my parents got my grades and they said, you need to get yourself together or you'll have to leave school. We cannot afford for you to lose this scholarship. And it was during the time of our like Christmas break before we go back to school that I had to get my own mind together for myself and say, like, you really want this, you know you can do it, you have to stay focused. And that next semester when I came back, ever since then, I was on the dean's list, did not lose my scholarship, and really just studied hard. And really got the study skills that I needed, was able to ask for help, got in groups of people. And so that was really, really helpful for me. One of the other things that I will say that was helpful for me to help me, you know, stay in college and remain focused was being a part of an organization called the National Society of Black Engineers. And there's a little icon and symbol right below where it says Stevens Institute of Technology. So the National Society of Black Engineers really helped me because the university that I attended, like I said, was predominantly white. So when I went to this organization, I could really see people who looked like me, college students, more of them, because there was a small handful that, that went to my university. And so when I went to the conference for the first time, I saw 20,000 young Black engineers, and that was so powerful to me. Whenever I would feel like, you know, I may not belong here or I get discouraged, being able to talk to other students from other universities who are also majoring in engineering who looked like me, it was really helpful. And so it was really the support that I needed that I didn't really get at my university, but I got from being a part of this organization. And so that helped me to be able to finish and to graduate. When it was time to graduate, I thought about what it was that I wanted to do in terms of work. No one at the university really talked to me about going to graduate school. So no one talked about going to graduate school. No one talked about doing research. So, and for my parents, they wanted me to go to college, and that was all they knew, like, go to college and you get a good job. And so that is what I said, okay, I'm gonna go to college, I'm gonna get a good job. But when it was time to think about what it is that I wanted to do after work, I said, I still am a busybody. I don't like being in one place for too long. So I had to think about that in terms of how I picked the job that I wanted to go after. And I wanted to be able to do different things. I didn't want to focus on the same thing every day. And so I actually went into consulting, which is a great field. So if you all are not aware of what consulting is, it's basically, you know, you work for one company and then they hire you out to other companies to basically help those other companies. And so I love just the concept of consulting because I got to go to different companies, even though I worked for one company, and I got to see what it is that they did at their companies. So I worked for a company called Anderson Consulting, which now is Accenture. And it is a major consulting company. And so when I was there, I got to work for Verizon, I worked for Dow Chemical, I worked for ExxonMobil. So these are our companies I was consulted to while I was working at Accenture. And being able to work there took me places all over the world. And so just the fact that, you know, my engineering degree took me places that I would have never gone, I thought that that was so awesome that I was able to have these experiences just based upon my education. And so I got to travel, which was great. And I was traveling. But on the downside of that, I will say that being in consulting is very demanding. You know, you have different projects that you have to work on. There are a lot of different deadlines. And so the thing about consulting is no matter what project you're working on, if you have a deadline, you have to finish and meet that deadline. Especially if you're traveling and you're not like home, the expectation is that you're going to do the work until it is completed. And so that is one of the things that I was not prepared for as a consultant, that I was working like 60 to 80 hours sometimes. So I was getting paid very well, don't get me wrong. But when you think about your life and what are some of the things that are important, you know, at that time I was young, I wasn't married, I didn't have any kids. So I was like, oh, I'm making good money. And you go from being in college and being broke and not having money until all of a sudden you're making really good money. But I wasn't able to enjoy the time to spend my money. I was working nonstop all the time. And I had to just think to myself, like, is this really how I want to live my life? You know, I worked hard in school, but I don't know if I want to make money and I'm not able to spend my money and enjoy it. And I was missing a lot of like family trips because I was always at work. And I was like, this is not the life that I wanted. I started, my husband and I were dating. I actually met my husband in the National Society of Black Engineers. He's also an engineer, he's a computer engineer. So, you know, with me traveling all over the world, that was hard on our relationship because I'm like, I don't even get to see my boyfriend. So I was like, is this the life that I want to have? And I knew that for the future, I wanted to have a family. And so I actually began talking to some of the executives who were women at the company and asking them about, you know, their lives and, you know, their families. And these were all women who were very high up in the company. And many of them either did not have children, they were like in their mid 40s to 50s, or they had children, but their children were young. So they were like, you know, 45, 48, and they had a little baby, you know, and I said, wow, by the time I want to be kicking my kids out of the house. So it just made me think about, so I'm young, but I still want to think about the future and what it is that I want to do. And so I decided from all of the interactions and every of the places that I visited and the meetings that I went to, I constantly saw the same thing, which was the lack of women and also the lack of minorities in many of these spaces. And that is one thing about engineering and also some of the other STEM fields, so science, the technology, and the mathematics, that being in some of these career paths, you don't see as many women and you don't see as many minorities. And so every time I went to a meeting and I began to travel, I was usually the only one there. I was usually the only woman or the only minority, and very isolating. It could get very lonely because although you're good at what your job is and you can interact with multiple people, you still want to be able to see people who look like you, right? And that's really key. And so I said, at this point, like, I'm working so much, I'm not able to see my family. I'm making good money, but I wanted to take a step back and think about my future and the rest of my life. And so I decided that I think that it's time for me to really leave engineering. I was working on some really cool projects. One project that I worked on was around acoustics engineering. And if you all don't know what acoustics engineering is, it's the study of sound, so the science of sound. So when you do a lot of research on different sounds, so you can hear my voice now, and maybe wherever you are, you're in a space that's quiet. Maybe you have the windows closed or the door closed, so you're keeping the sound out. But as soon as you open the window or open the door, you can hear multiple different sounds, right? So one of the projects that I did research on for a company that was called Lucid Technologies was to think about astronauts in space. And so when you think about astronauts in space, many people don't think when they're on the spacecraft and they're in the spaceship, all of the equipment that is in the spaceship with them. So nobody thinks about that equipment and how the equipment is very loud. It makes a lot of noise because they need all of that equipment to do all of the research and tests and everything that they need to do while they're in space. But one of the main complaints of the astronauts was that it was so noisy in there that they were not able to get any good sleep, right? And so we want the astronauts to be well rested so that they can do their tests and experiments. And so I was on a project where I got to work on thinking about how we could minimize the noise that is actually in the spaceship so that the astronauts would be able to have a good night's sleep. So something that you think is so simple, and I thought, I never even thought about this before. So that's what I love about like engineering and research is that, you know, you're given a problem and you really had to think around it. So we did a lot of different tests and just a lot of different experiments to just figure out the best ways that the astronauts would be able to sleep and be peaceful and then not be noisy with all of the equipment. So that was a really great project that I was a part of. I also worked on a project with Motorola where I worked on fiber optic cables. And if you all don't know what they are, it's really thin wires that have lights around them. And at this time, fiber optic cables were just starting to be known. And so now, you know, we have cell phones and your cell phone is your computer now, basically. And before there were these huge, big, giant phones that people would walk around with. But now you pretty much have your computer in your pocket. So all of the technology that are in these small little phones, they started off with just understanding fiber optics and how little tiny cameras and little tiny wires being put into these devices had so much power. And so all of these like different projects I worked on and the research that I did, I thought it was so interesting and fascinating. But again, I was usually the only person, usually the only one. And so I thought to myself, you know, all of this is nice and all of it is exciting, but if I'm not able to see more people who look like me and I can't do something to really help make sure that they understand, then I felt like I wasn't really doing my job. And so I decided to leave my job and leave engineering and really focus on how I could really help young people understand more about engineering. How could I be a better role model to these young people to show them that I look like you look like me. If I can do it, you can do it too. You know, neither one of my parents went to college. You know, I didn't grow up in the best neighborhood or the best area, but, you know, if you focus on your education and it's something that you want to do, that is your tool to really get you out of all of those different situations. And so I said, I'm going to quit my job. And at the time, I left my job right before I got married. And there's a picture of my husband and I were in the middle. And so I got married right after college, very young. I would definitely tell people to wait and travel and explore. But that, I mean, it was a great thing. We got married and I said, okay, I think I'm gonna leave my job. And so my husband, who was just my boyfriend at the time, said, are you crazy? You gonna leave your job? So he definitely said, you will have to cut back on your shoe habit of buying all your shoes. And so I had to really think about that. But it was definitely a great decision for me because I felt like it was needed and necessary for me to spend more time being able to talk to people who were from my community, who I know I didn't have someone come into my community who looked like me when I was younger to talk about engineering. So I wanted to be able to do that. So I left my job practicing engineering and began to really focus on middle school and high school to talk about engineering and what they could do. And I started doing that work and I said, okay, I'm gonna try this out. And if I love it, then I'll stay here. If it's something that I feel is really not for me, then I could always go back and practice. And I wind up loving it, being able to not only help students, but it was also important for me to be able to help teachers, because I had a great teacher who helped me, and to help parents, because my parents had no idea, no clue of what engineering was. And so it was really difficult in the beginning for them to support me because they were totally unaware of what engineering was. So I wanted to create programs to really be able to help parents at least have some knowledge so that they could help their children when it was time for them to make decisions about going into engineering, or to continue to encourage them and motivate them, and have somewhat of an idea. And so that's what I started doing. And I left industry probably about 18 years ago, and I have not regretted it at this point. And I think that for my parents, they said, "Are you crazy? You're leaving practicing engineering, and we put all this time and effort and all these prayers and everything for you to graduate and make it out." But I had to explain to them that all of the experiences that I had while I was studying engineering, it makes me a better and role model to be able to share my experiences with students, to be able to talk to them. So I said, don't worry, it was not for nothing. This all has really been able to help. And I thought about what it was that I wanted to do. I was always interested in education as well. And so I said, how do I go back and get another degree? And I wanted to bring in education and be able to combine my two loves of education and engineering. And so I went back to school and I got my degree in, that's where I got my degree in public administration, human resource management, and really focused on urban education to figure out how I could better help people and communities like the one that I grew up in. And so I went to graduate school, and I went to Rutgers University. So there's a red R in the picture in there. So that's where I went for graduate school and really began to study and understand more about education and how a lot of policies are made in education and how those really affect students who are in school. And I think people really don't think about those policies and how they affect kids and the people who have wealth and the people who don't have wealth. All of those things are surrounded around the policies that are created and made. And that's how you have people who have resources and don't have resources. And so being able to do that, I worked at Rutgers University while I was going to get my degree. And I was able to mentor students and be an advisor to students at the same time that I was going for my degree. And so that was, just the best thing to me, to be able to advise people and help them figure out what it was that they wanted to do with their lives. I didn't always have that same thing for myself. And so then I began to really think more about what it is I wanted to do, which is really help students also at a higher level. So not only just middle and high school students, but to be able to help college students. If you're a college student in engineering, people think, oh, you've made it, but there are still a lot of obstacles that you have to overcome, within even still just trying to get your degree. And so while I was working at Rutgers, I was able to be a part of an engineering research center where I had to do all of the education for universities. So one was Rutgers, it was Purdue University, New Jersey Institute of Technology, and then the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez. And so I had to direct all of those universities. And a really cool thing about that is I had to travel to the universities and talk to the faculty and talk to the students to really understand how I could best help them with their educational needs. And then I began teaching. So I actually taught intro to engineering to the freshmen who were coming in. And what I wanted to do was something totally different. I didn't want it to be the same boring lectures that I was in when I was in engineering. I wanted to make it fun and where we could do projects and talk about different things that were going on in the world. And I loved doing that. So it was really impactful for me, for the students, for me to be able to teach. And that's why I said this really is my passion for education, but also mixed with engineering. And then from Rutgers, I decided to go on to an organization called the American Society for Mechanical Engineers. And there's a little logo in the middle if you see ASME. And so although I'm an electrical engineer, I went to work for the mechanical engineers because they wanted someone to come in and do engineering education. And so, you know, at that point, it really doesn't matter what your degree of engineering is, you can definitely be an asset to what it is that you're trying to accomplish and do. And so I went there to really just be able to help with all education aspects and all of those different things. And being at ASME really just kind of pushed me more into international travel. There's also a branch in Beijing. So I spent a lot of time in Beijing. And there are photos of myself with my parents. So there's a photo of me right under Faith, where I got to go to the Great Wall of China. And then right above that, I was able to take my parents there. And so that was always my goal, being younger, to really be able to bring my parents to different places outside of the United States. So that was a big just accomplishment for me, to be able to tell my parents, I'm bringing you to China with me. And so they were just so excited and so happy, never, have gone there before. And so we had a great time where I was able to work, and I was invited to speak at a conference, and there were 600 faculty from China, and it was just me. So you can imagine, just thinking about even being in college, how I went to a predominantly white school, but now here I am at this conference in China where I'm a speaker, and it's just myself. I was the only brown person in there. And then all of these Chinese people, and there were 600 of them. And even out of that 600, there may have been probably 60 women. So still showing you that, even when you travel to other places, the numbers and percentages for women are still small. And so I felt like there's still so much work that I really need to do here. And it was very intimidating at first, that same intimidation of when I got to college and felt like I didn't belong. But I quickly brushed it off and got over it, because I said I was invited to come here and speak and talk about my research and what I've done in education. And so if I was invited, then I am the expert. And so I just let all of those kind of fears and doubts just kind of go away, and I gave my presentation. And so I just want you all to just know that, you definitely have something to add. You have value no matter what it is. And if someone asks you to speak somewhere and they ask you to do something, you are the expert at that point. So don't let, or try not to, because it's easy to say don't let. Try not to let those fears and doubts kind of creep in, because you know what it is that you know. And someone has asked you to come and tell what it is that you know. So always remember that. I also was invited to a conference with ASME that I got to speak in Brazil. That was also really cool. And I have a picture right underneath the one that I took for China, where I went to see the Christ Redeemer statue, and I got to go to the top of Brazil. So, all of these different experiences that I've had really has been because of my education. My education has really been able to help me explore the world. So when you're thinking about what type of career you want to go into, you should think about that, and think about your personality as well. Is this something that, I think I can do? Maybe I have longevity in it. I know many times for even like some of my friends, their parents picked their careers and said, listen, this is what you're going to do. But it is your life. And so you really want to try to pick something that you love and that you get excited about when you get up every day and do, right? So I'm also a mother. I have twins. So if you see on the far left-hand side, is Zoe and Zaire. And so they are 13 now. So, you know, that's just another attribute to, you know, especially as a woman, you can have a career, you can have a family, things are possible. And, you know, you would be surprised how many girls and women think, oh, if I think about going into engineering, will I be able to have a family? And that was a concern for me when I started to think about and talk to many of those executives that I used to work with. And so, you know, they are definitely a joy, a handful, but a joy. And right now, especially during COVID, everyone's in the house and they have to go to school in the house and homeschooling. And, you know, I'm doing my conference calls and then my husband is doing his conference calls. So now you have everybody home at the same time. So this experience has even been a learning experience for us all, even our little puppy. So they just got a puppy last Christmas. Her name is Hope. And she's even enjoying everyone being home since she's usually in the house all day by herself while we would go to work in school. So she's loving the fact that everyone is home. So these are just, you know, just images that I just wanted to show of just like my family, my friends, traveling, life, that, you know, with my career in engineering that I've had, even the non-traditional part of it, leaving, actually practicing, it can be very rewarding. And there are a lot of things that you can do. So I'll next talk about this thing that I really feel like is a huge accomplishment for me. It's called the If Then Project. And so as a part of, you know, all of the things that I've done, was asked to be and applied and was selected as a part of 120 other women to be women and ambassadors. And so the project is If Then, and, you know, if you educate a girl, then you educate a nation. And so I love that whole just phrase and saying that we really need to make sure that young people are educated, especially our girls, since within engineering, the numbers are so few. So this has been a great experience for me to be an If Then ambassador, to be able to talk to girls in middle and high school, and then to meet all of these other wonderful women who are doing awesome things in STEM as well. And so I'll just show, this is a huge accomplishment for me. I was a Girl Scout when I was young. And this is my daughter Zoe when she was a brownie. And so I was actually, because of If Then, asked to be one of the ambassadors to be in the new STEM badges. And so being able to be a part of this with these new STEM badges that come out is just kind of full circle, just being that Girl Scout myself. Now my daughter's a Girl Scout, and then having a badge that also represents, you know, technology and STEM at all different levels. And so being asked to do that for me was like a huge achievement. You know, I've received other awards, you know, for engineering, but this one I wanted to point out is just like a huge one that's really personal to me, that I feel is great, because now I'm not only just impacting a small group of girls, but Girl Scouts is all over. And so now I'm able to impact more girls who are in my community. So we talked about engineering, you know, and just the need to make sure that we have these demands for the workforce. So I'm not sure of all of the statistics and what you all have in your country, but I know that here, you know, science, technology, and engineering jobs have really increased like 51%. And these are occupations that are among the top 25 growing. And so we really need more scientists and engineers and computer experts. Not to mention that, again, you don't want to focus on just money, but many of these careers are really some of the highest paid occupations. So, you know, this is why we need engineers. This is why we need you all to think about, you know, if you want to go into engineering and what a career it can do for you. So when you talk about engineering, many times people ask like, what is engineering? And they may give you these long, complicated definitions about what engineering is. And I think that really kind of throws people off, you know, discourages people because they feel like that sounds too technical, or maybe that's way over my head. But if you just think about a plain, simple definition, you know, engineering is just using science and math to just solve problems, right? So as an engineer, you're a problem solver. And so I even tell my kids all the time when they ask me questions and I get why, and they're trying to answer these questions, I'm saying you're actually thinking like a scientist, thinking like an engineer, because you're really trying to figure out how to solve a problem. And it just goes back to myself being that young kid, being curious about how the television worked and the fact that I wanted to take it apart and didn't know what it was. But that was just my mind spinning like an engineer. So you don't need to be a genius in math and science, which is something else people think like, oh, you have to get straight A's, you have to be a genius. You just have to be able to use math and science as a tool to be able to accomplish what it is that you want to do. So if you don't remember anything else, just the plain, simple definition, like engineering is just using math and science to solve problems. And engineers are problem solvers. So I typically do an exercise with a ball so people can get an idea of how engineers are problem solvers. So, you know, when you're presented with, say, a ball and you're trying to get it into a cup or a can, that is a problem that's presented to you. Like, how do I get this ball into this can? And so usually now, since I've been sitting at my desk for a while and I have papers, I'll start to throw them and pretend that I have some basketball skills, even though my son tells me I'm horrible. So I'll take the paper and I consistently across the room throw the paper and try to get it into the can. So the problem is I'm trying to get this paper into the can, right? But when we think about like different exercises and things, I want to be able to get this into the can, but one of the constraints that I have is maybe I have to do it with my feet. Like if we had an imaginary line, and you would have to keep your feet behind the line, right? Only your feet behind the line. So how would you be able to do that? And so usually when I'm in the classroom with students, I'll have them throw the paper and try to get as many tries as they can to see if they can get that ball into the can. But one of the things when you think about this exercise is you have to think about the constraint, right? Only your feet. So then what I typically do is get down on the floor and I will usually crawl my body over to the can and I can just put the ball right into the can, right? Because the constraint that I had was only your feet can be behind the line. And so that's all engineering is. You're presented with a problem and you may have a constraint. So you have to focus on what that constraint is to be able to solve your problem. And sometimes solving that problem will involve math and it will involve science. But any problems that you're put forth, you're still trying to figure it out. So that's what a problem solver is, and that's what engineers do. So that's just a basic, simple kind of exercise to just show that, you know, engineering is in everyone's daily life. So I also just wanted to tell you just about like environments for engineers. Some people think, oh, as an engineer, you have to stay in the lab and you work by yourself. But engineers are people oriented and they work with machines. As an engineer, you do have times that you work by yourself, but you also work in a team. You can work to improve people's lives, but then you also can gain personal satisfaction when you see maybe something that you've done and people are able to use and take advantage of. And I mentioned already, you know, for some people, they think, oh, can you have a family and be an engineer? You can focus on your career and you can also have a family and then you can make money. But then who are really focused on, you know, what can I do to really help society? So you can also make a difference. So you can make a difference and make money. So these are just different environments that engineers work in. So I just wanted to show you that there's no just one way that engineers practice. They practice multiple different ways. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is just like some of the core engineering disciplines. And so these are kind of, if you think about it, like the parent engineering, right? So there are many, many different specialties and subtopics that come out of engineering, but these are just kind of like the umbrella of engineering. So you have biomedical engineering. And if you think about it, biomed is when you're able to combine science and you're able to combine engineering. So you put those together, the medicine and the engineering. And, you know, when you think about it, like an example is just, you know, trying to give someone a prosthetic leg, a limb, or something like that. And there's a lot of like robotic limbs. So that brings in a lot of other disciplines as well. So then you have mechanical. And typically when people think about mechanical, they think about mechanics or people who fix cars. But mechanical engineers do so much more. In the picture there's a woman standing next to a robot, and she has worked on this robot and basically been able to program it so it mimics her every move, right? So there are a lot of mechanical systems and devices within that robot that that mechanical engineers need to focus on and look at. And those things can be very helpful to society. And then you have electrical and computer engineering. And typically in a lot of universities, they put those two together because electrical and computer engineers really work very closely together. So really hand in hand. So if you think about anything in terms of the computer, anything that has something to do with electronics, circuits, anything like that, you know, electrical and computer engineers do. One of the other myths is that you can only work like at a technology company. But there are a lot of electrical and computer engineers who work at banks. You need all of these people there to be able to keep things running. So when when people are thinking about a job, if they're a specific discipline, they say, oh, well, I can't work there because I have this degree. But the great thing about engineering is that you can work at any type of company. You can work for the government. Anywhere that you want with a degree in engineering, because engineering really helps you to really analyze, and it helps you to think critically. And those skills that you learn can take you anywhere that you want to go, right? So then the next one is industrial engineering. And industrial engineers really do a lot of planning. If you see in the picture, there's a person sitting at a desk, they're sitting at a seat. So even as I'm sitting here right now, industrial engineers needed to think about the ergonomics of how people sit in their chairs. So even if you see, like, you know, a lot of times people have like cushions now underneath their keyboards to really help them, because there are people who are having issues with their wrist if they constantly worked on a computer nonstop. So they had to think about different things that they could do to help those people who constantly were on the computer, who were constantly typing. So that's just one aspect of what industrial engineers do. And then you have chemical engineers. And you see a child there with, you know, their different medicines. So that's not the only thing that they do. It's just one example. And when I was actually working at Rutgers as a part of the Engineering Research Center, one of the things that they were researching was how to be able to have the same dose of medicine in every tablet. And I thought it was so cool and so interesting, because even I didn't know. If you have a bottle of, let's just say Tylenol, and there are 30 capsules in there, every single capsule does not have the same dose of medicine. So if you've ever taken Tylenol or some type of medicine for pain, you may have found that maybe you took it this one time, and maybe you took it for a headache, and maybe your headache went away, like, you know, within an hour or so. But maybe you took it another time and it took several hours before your headache went away or before the pain went away. And that is because in that bottle of capsules, every single capsule has a different dose of medicine in it. So one capsule can have 10% medicine, another one could have 50%, another one could have 90%. And then there are even some capsules in there that have no medicine in them. So one of the things that they are researching is how to make it so that there's the same amount of medicine in every capsule. So I always thought that that was really interesting, and it's something basic that you can explain because pretty much everyone has had to take medicine of some type. So it just helps you understand how engineering impacts, you know, your everyday life. And then the last one is civil engineers. And when people think about civil engineering, they think about building bridges, and, you know, building buildings, but civil engineers do a lot more. They also do a lot of urban planning. So whatever community they're in, they need to think about where to put buildings, where houses should go, where roads should go to, where power plants should go. So civil engineers, they do a lot. They also do things with the water treatment centers. So there's so many different things that you can do, but these are the core engineering disciplines. So just to give you an example of these, like I said, there are so many more different types. So the other thing is I just wanted to talk about like careers with engineering. So again, engineering prepares you to think and solve problems, be creative, and understand new technologies. But you can also be an engineer and go into other areas. So like I mentioned with biomedical engineering, you can go into medicine. So you can go into law as an engineer. They have patent lawyers. So patent lawyers are the people who represent, if you have a design and you don't want someone to steal it, like you put a patent on it. And if someone tries to take your design and copy it, you need a lawyer to represent you because you may need to sue them for using your product and you have a patent on it. So who better to represent you than a lawyer who has a degree in engineering, right? So you can go from engineering to law, you can go into management. About 73% of many of the CEOs of these Fortune 500 companies, they all have backgrounds in engineering. So although they're in business and they're leading these companies, they have a degree in engineering. And it just goes to show you that training that they got as an engineer really helped them within business. Or you can go into sales, or you could stay in engineering. So all of these things, it shows how engineers can jump into all these other different fields, even education. There are a lot of engineers who are teachers, right? But you don't find all these other careers jumping into engineering, right? So you don't hear a doctor say, I think I want to do engineering. You don't hear a lawyer saying, I think I want to do engineering. But an engineer could say, I think I want to go to medical school. I think I want to go to law school. So it's a great way to show you that even if you have these interests, you can still start with a foundation in engineering. This is just an example I wanted to show about how all of the disciplines work together to focus on one product. So this product is my favorite. I love chocolate. So just to give you a basic product that everyone would pretty much be able to understand. So for civil engineers, they have an impact on this chocolate bar because they have to think about developing methods and ways of keeping food stable and fresh, right? So if you get your chocolate bar, you don't want it to be broken into pieces when you buy it. You want to break that candy into pieces yourself, right? And when you open up the package, you want to make sure that it's fresh and it's not stale. So chemical engineers think about packaging. So that's another aspect of what chemical engineers do. So for mechanical engineers, if you think about the actual factory where the candy is made, they need to think about all of the systems and the rates of speed that the bars are coming down, because even as the chocolate is being made, you don't want it to be broken there either. So they need to think about all of the actual mechanical systems that the chocolate is being made in and how they come out. So electrical and computer engineering, of course, they develop all of the smart control systems. So now with technology, before they actually used to be a person that would like press a button or make sure that, you know, the chocolate comes out at, you know, every 2 minutes on the hour or something like that. But now you're able to actually program these machines to think about how you manage the production of the candy, right? And then civil engineers. So not only do they have to think about the design and the construction of the building that the chocolate is made out of, but they also need to think about, again, the urban planning part of it, right? Because as much as I love chocolate, I would not want a chocolate factory to be right next to my house, right? Because you would smell chocolate all the time, nonstop. So for civil engineers, they need to think about in terms of like the community, like where would this chocolate factory go? Where's the best place to put it? Because we don't want to put it where there are too many residential houses. And then for industrial engineers, they have to think about, instead of producing a small batch in your kitchen, they have to think about how can we really produce this at a larger scale, right? How can we make sure that this chocolate goes all over the world? And so they need to think about all the different processes of how to make sure that that happens. So this is just an example I wanted to just show you all in terms of how all the disciplines of engineering all work together, how they have to work together to make an impact on one particular product, right? So that engineers do have to work together. They have to work in teams, and they're all impacted. And then the last thing is just to review some of those misconceptions of engineering. So you don't need to be a genius in math or science. You just need to know how to use it as a tool. And then this, you know, sometimes when people see this on the screen, the second one, they're like, that's pretty obvious, but it's not. There are a lot of people who still think only men can be engineers. And that is a huge misconception. Women can be engineers. You're looking at a woman engineer. And so for biomedical engineering, 50% of biomedical engineering are women. So women can be engineers. This is definitely a career that I would definitely encourage any woman who's thinking about it to pursue. And then the last thing is that engineers can't communicate. People think that, oh, they just work on numbers and they work on all these different systems, and they don't know how to speak. They don't know how to present. They don't know how to talk to each other and talk to other people. But that's a huge misconception. Engineers definitely know how to communicate. One of the things you need to do is, if you have a product that you need to present, you have to be able to present it in such a way that people want to buy it. So you can make the best invention in the world, but if you can't communicate that invention, then it may never go to product development. So you have to be able to communicate what it is that you're working on, your product, and what you're developing and what you're inventing. So I'm going to stop there, see if you all have any questions. I hope that you really learned a lot and got something from it. And so I'll take questions now.
Thank you very much. That was really insightful. I really learned a lot, and I think the students, you know, agree with me too. So I have some questions here from some students, but since they are having network issues, they keep logging in and logging out. So I'll just be asking the questions on their behalf.
Sure.
Angela is 14 and she would like to ask, is there a difference between studying electronic engineering only and studying electrical electronics engineering, and which is the easiest?
So I will say, Angela, they're both tough, and they're very similar. I would say the main thing about the differences are in terms of your education, because you will find that many of the maybe like electronics, maybe they do more of a technology based, right? They're learning and they're studying in school, it's more hands-on. So they're actually learning and working on things at the same time. Whereas like electrical engineering, focus more on the actual theory, right? So you learn all the theory of it. You have to learn all of the equations and differential equations, and you may have to take a little bit more math. But just because you have to take a little bit more math does not mean that electronics is easier, because you're actually, for hands-on electronics, you're actually working directly on those projects. So those pretty much are what the differences are. It's just hands-on application versus electrical engineering being more theory-based and you having to understand more of the theory.
Okay. Another question from Ayomide. Ayomide is 14. She's asking, what checks and balances do you use to make sure you don't make mistakes when working on a project?
That's a good one. So one of the things that you want to do is when you're working on projects is you want to be able to separate your variables, right? So when you're doing different tests, one of the things that researchers do and engineers do is you want to set up different control systems, right? So if you're working on something, you want to have a test control in one area and a test control in another area. You don't want them to be close at all because you want to make sure that they're not mixed. Scientists do the same thing. So if you even think about what's happening with COVID now, as they're thinking about different vaccinations and things that they need to do, they need to make sure that some of the people who are taking one type of trial, they're not being mixed with the people who are taking the other trial. So you just want to make sure that they're kept completely separate so that you can run all of your tests. A good example would be when I was doing research in acoustics engineering, we would just have like different rooms that we were in. So everything was kept very separate. So all of the experiments and tests that we were running, we would have different sound rooms to make sure that there weren't any of the variables that affected the other one. So that's one of the things that I've done in my research, and I know a lot of engineers and scientists do, is that whenever you're testing things, you want to be able to make sure that your variables are kept far apart from each other so you can get the best results when it's time for you to analyze and look at them.
Thank you very much. Another question from Glory. Glory is 16 years old and she's asking, what is the most challenging engineering project you have been involved with recently?
Oh, I would say the most challenging was actually, was when I was working at Motorola with some of the fiber optic cables, because again, at that time, this was even like way before where you all are now with the tiny little cell phones, and like the computer is in this phone. But at that time, the phones were huge. And so it was very challenging to be able to work with all of this new technology that was so tiny. I mean, they're like so small. Sometimes we would have to use like little devices where we would pick up the actual circuits that were in there, because before the circuits were much bigger. And so you could just pick them up with your hand and move them. But now you would have to use like little like tweezer type things to actually be able to pick up the fiber optic cables. So it was really challenging to be able to work on a project and put them together when now all of the materials and all of the wires are so tiny. So that was really, really challenging. Many times you would have to have like a magnifying glass even to be able to put together the circuit board. And I'm not sure if many of you have ever like had an old phone or like taken it apart, but if you do, you will see that everything in here is so small. So it is so surprising that all of this technology that's in this little tiny phone is a computer. It is really surprising. And so it's really challenging to work with all of the circuits and everything that's in here that are like little tiny, like micrometers, where sometimes you can hardly see them. So that is a really challenging aspect. But it also is really fun and rewarding to know that, you played a part when you're done to say, I actually worked on that, right? I actually had a hand in that. And when you see your products like, or you go see, I was able to see like some of the Motorola phones that I actually worked on, and it was really exciting to go in and say I had a hand in that. I actually was able to work on it. So as much as it's like really challenging as you're doing it, it's also very rewarding when you're able to see the finished product.
Thank you very much. And for those that are just joining us, if you have any question, please use the chat box to type in your questions. I have 2 more questions here with me, and I think I'll just ask both of them together.
Okay.
Yeah, so Agape is 10 and she's asking, what technologies have you been working with in the past 5 years? And the last question from me is from Uche Chimere. She is 15 years old and she would like to know,
Mhm.
what do you enjoy most about engineering?
Okay, so I would say in terms of the technology that I've worked with has been really around the medicine, and one of the research projects that I talked about for the tablets, for the actual pills. And even though I'm an electrical engineer, I was able to really help to try to understand what the researchers were working on so that I could break that down to where a middle school or a high school student would be able to understand. And so I had to take all of their research, understand what they were doing, and be able to put it into a curriculum so that young students would be able to understand how it actually works in terms of pharmaceuticals and medicines. And that was a really easy concept to be able to get. It was even one that even as an engineer, I was not aware of. And I would, I started to think about it, like there are times when I do take medicine for my headache and one day it may go away very quickly. And then maybe the next day or the next week when I take it, it takes so long and I still have a headache. I don't know what's going on. But when they were able to show me and talk about the research, and I was able to actually go to the research lab and I could actually look and see when they would have the machines and have the different powders that are in there, because all of the medicines start as powders first, right? And so they're in the machine and the machine is going, they're doing research to see how to make that machine mix as uniform as possible, meaning everything is moving at the same speed and the same rate, so that when the machine has the tablets come out, that all of the tablets have as much of the same amount of medicine as possible, right? Because you don't want to spend your money to go get something to take care of your headache or your pain and then it not have the same dose of medicine. So that was a big thing that I had to learn in terms of that particular research and be able to understand it so that I can then put it into curriculum so that students would be able to understand as they were thinking about medicine, thinking about engineering, even in how the tablets dissolve as you take them, the process of it actually dissolving and going into your system and what happens. So there's a lot of medicine that's involved, but then there's also a lot of engineering that's involved too. Because if you look at a tablet and it's coated, sometimes you may think there are certain capsules that are coated with plastic, right? So it's not just regular plastic. It's not just plastic you would find like on your, maybe your soda bottle or something like that. They have to think about what that plastic is and how harmful or helpful it will be to your body once you ingest it. So they need to think about the materials and how that's going to have an impact to, your organs and what is in your body and how it dissolves and how it absorbs. So that was one of the latest things that I did within the last 5 years. And can you repeat the second question for me?
What do you enjoy most about engineering?
Oh, wow.
Yes.
What I enjoy most about it is just all of the new ideas and technology that's really coming out now. So one of the really new things that I love is just when you think about artificial intelligence, it's really cool. It can be really scary because you're talking about artificial intelligence, right? And it's also related to machine learning, how machines actually learn. So if you have like maybe Alexa like in your house, right? That's an example of machine learning. If I say, and I wish I had it up here, mine is actually downstairs in my house, but because Alexa has learned my voice and has learned different things that I've asked, so now when I say, Alexa, I'm looking for a French toast recipe, when you put in different things, so the next time I might ask, it may give me a different one. It may ask me an additional question because Alexa is really learning me and some of the things that I like, right? So one of the things that I think is really cool and exciting, like the new technology around artificial intelligence, learning. Like I said, it can be very scary because, you know, these machines are doing a lot and we're programming them to do a lot. So just even in terms of like the government and having all of this information, and there are people who want to hack into different systems and, you know, things like that. So that's the scary part of it. But I will even say that there are so many different things that we still have to learn about our artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's a lot of diversity that is now being talked about around that, because even as you have your phone, right? So you can do face recognition, right? And so around machine learning, I have my phone, which is a machine, and if I put my face to it, it should come on because that's the way I programmed it. But when they were first testing that out, there was a bias against the faces that the machine was able to recognize. And there weren't faces, they were predominantly white faces. And there are white faces and structures that don't look like Black faces. And so I think that it's really cool and exciting. One of the things that I love about engineering is that there's always opportunities to make something better, to do more tests, and you always find out something new. And so even as an engineer myself, and having been out of engineering college for almost 20 years, there are still things that I get really excited about and I think are really cool to this day.
Thank you so much. We have a question here from the chat box from Cinderella. She is 15 years old and she would like to know what kind of challenges excite you professionally.
Wow, I think the challenges that excite me professionally is really learning something new that I did not know before, and also meeting new people, because I think that that's a huge part of even being in any career that you're in, is being able to learn about people that you didn't know from different backgrounds. I think that that's really important. So I love being able to find out something new about a person, or maybe where they're from, or what type of projects that they're working on. I think that that is really, really interesting. Even in terms of like 3D printing, right? So when 3D printing first came out, it was something that was only for the government. They had these huge 3D machines and they started printing and being able to like print organs. They were able to print prosthetics. And it's like, wow, they were able to print this from an actual printer. And I think that that's so cool. But now, the thing that I love is that now you have that technology that was only meant to be in a lab, right? Or only meant to be for companies. Now you can have that right in your own house, right? So I have a 3D printer. It was not that expensive. Before, probably 5 years ago, it would have been hundreds, probably thousands of dollars. Now people can get a 3D printer for, you know, a small amount of money, and you can 3D print stuff right inside of your house. So I think that that's really cool, being able to now have the technology be more accessible to people so that they can do it right in their own homes. And I think that that is really one of the things that's rewarding for me, just to be able to learn new things, because that's something that I didn't learn, that I didn't have. And so now my kids who are 13, they're like, oh, can we 3D print this? Can we 3D print that? And you know, at their age, I was just like taking stuff apart and trying to figure stuff out, and, you know, had Legos and that's it. But they're like, Legos, they want to 3D print their own Legos, right? So I think that that is what is really cool and interesting. And, you know, I love to learn new things. So they're teaching me different things as well. And I'm like, I'm the engineer, but they're always teaching me. So that's a really cool aspect of engineering, and the fact that you can never be too young to start being an inventor, a builder, a designer. You don't have to wait until you get to college or wait until you graduate from college. You can start with any ideas that you have right now. There was an article that I read about a 7-year-old girl, and she had her backpack where she carried her books, and it was like a suitcase. So she had a handle and she would roll it. But she was shorter than the average 7-year-olds. So the handle would just be too much for her. And I was just like, wow, it's just amazing how kids think, and little kids, have so many different ideas. So she talked to her parents about how she wanted to make a new handle for her book bag, right? For her little rolly bag. And in the article, I read like her mother was just so surprised, like, you're 7, and what are you what are you talking about? But the father, who knew some people who were engineers, said, well, maybe we should talk to somebody else about it and see about her idea. And they did that. And so long story short, she was able to have a design for her rolly book backpack. And she actually got a patent on it. She got a patent on the one that she had the idea about. And of course, she got her parents' help along with some of their friends who they looked into engineering, and they helped her work on what it would actually look like. But I'm like, she's 7 years old and she has a patent on this handle of a backpack, like a little rolly suitcase. And so I just loved reading that, because I think many times young people think, I'm too young to make a difference. I'm too young to do anything right now. But no, you can start at whatever age you are, right? Also in like the hair care industry. I know that even like in the United States, many Black women are really exploring a lot of hair care products and how to make your own natural products, right? There are a lot of young girls who are doing that as well. And so they're not engineers, but you have to know something about chemistry and how different materials work together, right? Because you don't want to put something in your hair that's gonna make your hair fall out, or put something in there that'll make it like too greasy, or, so you need to think about the materials. You want it to be healthy, for your hair. And so there were young girls who were making their own hair products and making their own lotions and making their own soap and their own jewelry even. So you're never too young to be able to do that. And that's one of the things I love about seeing. One of the last things I'll say is, because we're in COVID and with the ability for people to have their own 3D printers, I saw so many like news articles and things actually on television about young people being able to help make masks and different things for the healthcare workers that they could use. And so that was their way of not only helping and getting involved, but they were using engineering to be able to do that by 3D printing the shields and the different components that they can then drop off to the hospital. So then you had young high school students bringing these products to the hospital where the government was not even doing that, right? So it just goes to show you that, in this field of engineering, I get really excited just about the continued possibilities and about the future, because you all are the future. And I know that you have some amazing ideas and amazing things that you can do. So again, like, even if you don't become an engineer, just think about it. And there are so many different things you can do with it, because again, the way it gets you to think and how it trains your mind, you can use that in whatever career you want to go into.
Wow, thank you so much. I don't think we have any other question.
Okay.
Yes, so I don't think we have any other question. Thank you very much. On that note, I just want to thank you once again for spending time with us, and we really appreciate the valuable insights and your openness in sharing your story and some of the lessons that have helped you to become very successful in your career. And we look forward to engaging with you more in the future. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much once again. And have a great rest of the day and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You all as well. And remember, you're all remarkable and you can do great things. And Jane, if anyone is interested in getting in touch with me, you can definitely share my email and any of my contact information. And I am on most of all the social media, so you can definitely find me there as well. Thank you all again. Enjoy the rest of
Thank you
your
very
day.
much. Yeah. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.